Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay, and welcome again to FUSANG Community. Today, we have a very special guest who's going to talk about CBDCs. First of all, my name is Lindane. I am calling live from Hong Kong, and I am the Chief of Staff here in FUSANG. So let me do this very, very quickly. I'm going to share a few slides if you guys don't mind. All right. Okay, perfect. Okay, there you go. I hope you can see my slide okay, but you can see here on the very first one, the topic that we're going to discuss today, which is CBDCs and the potential impact. So the potential impact, definitely, that how it's going to affect our day-to-day lives. And again, perhaps Dr. Oriol will be touching upon the progress of CBDCs in different countries. So these are the key topics that Dr. Yo will be discussing today. So obviously you have the introduction here in the CBDCs, from the basics definitions and how CBDCs are not cryptocurrencies. And he can tell us the differences between those two. The technical architecture. If anyone is interested in the technicalities of CBDCs, this is for you. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to give us the updates of central bank digital currencies all over the world, at least for 2021. The digital RMB, of course, is one of the examples of the world's most advanced CBDCs, pilot tests in Japan, Korea, and of course, in the Middle East as well. And also, last but not the least, like what I mentioned earlier, the impact of CBDCs in our daily lives in the context of the wider adoption of digital assets. So before I do that, let me do a very quick introduction of our speaker today. So Dr. Oriol is actually calling all the way from Spain today. So hola, Dr. Oriol.
Hi.
So, yeah, so Dr. Oriol is a very, very well-accomplished man. He is a fintech advisor and is advising a number of startups and also incubators globally. He is also a fellow at the Digital Euro Association, Singapore University of Social Sciences, and also an honorary fellow at the Asian Institute of International Financial Law at the University of Hong Kong. Last but not the least, I'd like to plug very, very quickly FUSANG and how does CBDC help facilitate digital securities with ease. So FUSANG is Asia's first and only regulated stock exchange focused on digital securities available to retail investors. So digital securities very obviously could be used to buy digital currencies rather could be used to buy digital securities at a regulated exchange like FUSANG. And obviously digital securities can offer you access to larger pool of assets and opportunities that were previously not available to retail investors. And of course, digital securities are the next big thing to disrupt the financial markets. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to you everyone, Dr. Oriol, who's going to talk about the CBDCs and again, its potential impact. So Dr. Oriol, please take over the virtual floor.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me today. I would like to thank all the FUSANG community for inviting me. And well, as Linden mentioned before, my name is Dr. Oriol Caudevilla, and I'm going to talk to you today about CBDCs and their potential impact. My plan is to talk for about 40 minutes and then allow you to ask me as many questions as you want for maybe like 15, 20 extra minutes. I'm aware though that this time may not be enough for you to ask all the questions, so this is why any of you may feel free to reach out to me either via LinkedIn afterwards or via the FUSANG community and ask me any further questions that you may have. So without further ado, let me proceed by sharing my screen. Okay. Okay, perfect. So, regarding the questions, as I said before, the idea is to solve all your doubts at the end. However, feel free to type any question that you may have before. If I see any very relevant question to the topic, I will try to address it before moving forward. But still, bear with me because I may not be able to see it. So the idea is to do it all at the end. Well, disclaimer, basically, I know this is obvious, but any opinion that I express in this talk is, well, are my opinions, and I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone else. I know this is obvious, but still, I feel like I needed to remind it. This is the index of my session, which has actually already been shared to you by Linden, so I'm going to skip this part. Same as my introduction, I don't want to talk more about myself because Linden already made a very nice presentation, so I can skip this part. Starting on about this topic, basically, I'm going to tell you what CBDCs are, and also the idea is to try to tell you how CBDCs may impact our daily lives in this context of a much wider adoption of digital assets. Even though, as you will see, this last point, the one in which I talk about how CBDCs may impact our daily lives, I'm also going to open a bit of a debate, no? Because I don't think this is like something which has like one single answer to this question, to this problem. I mean, there are like so many ways to consider this topic. So this is why I want you to participate in the end as well and try to debate a bit how you see this topic, you know. But before reaching that point, we need to start like from the very beginning. What are central bank digital currencies? And before doing that, we need to have a look at what central bank money is. Central bank money is actually a very obvious concept, but still, I mean, I need to remind you. Central bank money is a legal tender issued by a central bank, and it represents a claim against that central bank. So, in other words, every time you use a euro, a Hong Kong dollar, an RMB, US dollars, etc., you are using central bank money because that money, that currency, has been issued by a central bank, and it represents a liability against that central bank. So, taking it forward, there is this concept of CBDCs. CBDCs are basically a digital version of that central bank money. In other words, whenever we talk about a digital euro, a digital yuan, and so forth and so on, we are talking about nothing else but a digital version of that physical money that already exists, of a physical version of that central bank money that we already have. So, I'm going to skip this part for now. All CBDCs, if we want to call them CBDCs, need to fulfill two criteria. They need to be digital, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about central bank digital currencies, and they need to represent a liability against a central bank. And this is so because, as we saw before, central bank digital currencies, aside from being digital, are, at the end of the day, central bank money. So, if a CBDC is not digital and it doesn't represent a liability against a central bank, it's not a CBDC. It's something else, but it's not going to be a CBDC for sure. And aside from that, CBDCs may have some optional features that you can see listed here below, such as when it comes to transparency, convertibility, when it comes to the records of transfers and holdings, etc. One of the key points to me when it comes to talking about CBDCs is trying to see what is the actual motivation behind each central bank and each government to deploy or not deploy in the end a CBDC. We need to bear in mind, though, that CBDCs are a very new area, which means that most of the things that we are talking about, that we are discussing, are still, quite theoretical, we could say. I mean, we didn't see yet any major economy properly rolling out any CBDC. The only country in the world which has already deployed a CBDC was the Bahamas in the Caribbean last year. But when we talk to major economies, China is going to be the first one to properly roll out the digital yuan, a CBDC, next year, which means that this topic, as you can see, is still like very new. It's not like something that we've been like talking about for decades, which means that well, this makes this topic fascinating and at the same time tricky. Tricky because everything is quite new, so we need to like learn by doing. So as I said before, there may be several motivations behind CBDCs. I mean, the rationale behind central bank does not need to be the same. I mean, let's assume, for example, that we eventually have a digital euro in Europe in the future. The digital euro doesn't need to look at all like the future digital yuan, for example, because each central bank is going to design its CBDCs differently according to their own policies and interests. A CBDC may be designed and deployed eventually to replace physical banknotes. This is maybe like the most obvious motivation, but not the most important one to me. They may be deployed as well and designed to help have a much more efficient monetary policy. They may be used as well as a tool to improve financial stability. They may be used as well to promote financial inclusion. They may be used to fight financial crime. As you can see, the motivations are several. Financial inclusion, for example, is a very important one. When we talk about well, creating, let's say, a CBDC in sub-Saharan Africa, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, maybe Indonesia as well, in these kind of countries whose unbanked population is so high, creating a CBDC might be a very effective tool to promote financial inclusion. While in some other countries, let's say, for example, well, the countries in the European Union and the US, financial inclusion may not be maybe the main goal, but the main focus maybe would be on, let's say, monetary policy. It depends. When it comes to China and its digital yuan, as I'm going to explain later, to me, the main focus is not promoting financial inclusion, which is of course important, but I wouldn't say this is the main focus that the People's Bank of China has, but the idea of promoting cross-border payments using the yuan. I'm going to come back to this idea later, though. I'm just mentioning it now, but it's just a brief mention. So before moving forward to the next part of my presentation, I think there are a couple of distinctions that I need to make in here, because it's very common even on the media to find these kind of confusing ideas. I mean, I've seen many times some media, especially in the West, and I'm not talking about shady media. In some cases we talk about, well, theoretically reliable media, referring to CBDCs as cryptocurrencies, referring to the digital yuan, for example, as China's cryptocurrency, China's Bitcoin, this kind of stuff that it's actually confusing, because I mean, CBDCs are obviously not Bitcoin, and they aren't even like cryptocurrencies in general. So we need to have like all the different concepts very clear, because I mean, they are of course intertwined, they are related, but they are not the same. I say that CBDCs are not cryptocurrencies for two reasons maybe, but the main one is the fact that the rationale behind CBDCs and cryptos is actually the opposite. The idea behind cryptocurrencies is precisely this idea of not being centralized, this idea of lack of control. I mean, the cryptocurrencies are the flagship idea of this new movement called DeFi, decentralized finance, which means that people buying and selling cryptos, they precisely want to avoid this idea of being controlled, having all your transactions tracked by a government. No, I mean, it's this new idea of decentralized finance. I mean, new. It's been on for a few years, but it's you know what I mean. And then CBDCs, on the other hand, are like the opposite in that sense. I mean, they are completely centralized. I mean, they are like the most centralized that you can ever find, because they are not only central bank money, therefore issued by a central bank, but since they are programmable money and digital, they are going to be much more efficiently tracked than the physical coins and notes that we already use. I mean, it's been a common practice for central banks sometimes to keep track, to lose track, sorry, of some of the coins and notes that they printed or minted in the past, because being physical makes it sometimes a bit difficult for central banks to give like an absolute track. However, when it comes to CBDCs, this is going to allow central banks to track much more efficiently all the cash flow, all the transactions, etc. This has advantages and disadvantages. The main advantage is that it's going to allow central banks and governments to fight financial crime much more efficiently, because transactions are going to be much more easily tracked. The downside to this whole story is when it comes to some concerns expressed worldwide, but especially in the West, regarding privacy. Central banks will need to design the right architecture, the right technology to ensure that the privacy of all the citizens is actually protected, because otherwise there might be a risk in there. No? So as you can see, the rationale behind both ideas and concepts is actually the opposite. Aside from that, there is also this difference. It's not that clear though, but it's kind of a difference still, that cryptocurrencies, even though they may be used, of course, as a currency in the sense that you may use cryptos to buy and sell products, because it's possible to exchange them for fiat currency, etc., etc. So far, they have mostly been used more like as an investment, by most people, whereas CBDCs do not get attached that much to this idea of an investment. CBDCs are going to be nothing else but the digital version of the money, the central bank money that we already use, which means that cryptocurrencies are much more flexible, because they allow us to do many more things. We can use them as to make payments, as an investment. CBDCs are not going to be that flexible in that sense when it comes to the practical uses, I would say. This doesn't mean, though, that CBDCs and cryptos are like opposite worlds, because they are not. CBDCs actually are adopting many technical features from cryptocurrencies. So, for example, looking at the case of the digital yuan, we see that the digital yuan is going to use both online and hardware wallets. And it's also going to use a two-key architecture system to secure transactions. Those two features, as you can see, are technical features adopted from the cryptocurrency world. So this shows us that even though, as I said before, cryptos and CBDCs are not the same, technically speaking, CBDCs may be learning from the other, from cryptos. Same happens, for example, with blockchain technology. CBDCs do not need to use blockchain necessarily. It's not like compulsory for them, but it's useful and compatible for them to do so. Looking, for example, at the case of the digital yuan is going to work through this two-tier structure in which the People's Bank of China is going to issue the digital yuan to the commercial banks on this first level without using blockchain. And then on a second level, the commercial banks are going to issue the digital yuan to the general public through the use of blockchain. So, for example, as you can see, the idea is that theoretically, the digital yuan, for example, is going to use blockchain only partially. This slide shows you how blockchain works, but I'm sure that all of you already know that, so I'm going to skip it. I just wanted to include it just in case. And as you all know, blockchain, even though it was created to underpin the operations of cryptocurrencies, right now is being used in many other countless areas. It's not only used in cryptos any longer, but it's also used in trade finance, in smart contracts, insurance, healthcare, video games, CBDCs as well. So blockchain offers countless opportunities. I'm skipping this one. Okay, this one shows here two images of the wallet apps that are going to be used to support the digital yuan, the ones designed by the Cultural Bank of China. So moving forward, now that we already know what CBDCs are, we need to talk about what's the current status of CBDCs all over the world. So basically, according to a report published last year by the Bank of International Settlements, 80% of central banks in the world are already working on CBDCs. And when I say work on, I don't mean that all of those 80% of central banks in the world are actually going to roll out a CBDC anytime soon or ever. What I mean is that they are at least doing some initial research on this topic. It doesn't mean that they will all eventually deploy their own CBDC. We don't know that now for sure at all. We just know that they are interested in at least doing some research and eventually perhaps testing a CBDC. I mean, there are many projects, there are many ongoing projects all around the world. But to me, Asia, well, I mean, actually based on the stats, on the numbers, not just to me, Asia is the place in the world where CBDCs seem to be attracting much more interest. Aside from China, which, as I said before, is the major economy in the world whose CBDC project is more advanced, many other countries have shown in Asia their interest in, at least testing their CBDCs or working on this subject. I mean, this list includes Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Philippines, and also Japan and Korea. Japan is actually testing now its digital yen, and Korea will do so as well. Even though the digital yen is not going to be exactly like the digital yuan, because, for example, the idea that the Bank of Japan has is different in the sense that whilst China is planning on actually deploying its digital yuan next year, the Bank of Japan wants to do those tests, wants to test the digital yen this year just to test it, to know whether it is feasible or not. But the idea is not to deploy it anytime soon, even if the tests are successful. So as you can see, the central bank is going to move forward or not, depending on their own current situation, interests, etc. So moving forward, the digital yuan. I actually think this is maybe like the most important or relevant part of my talk, in the sense that, I mean, what I said before is very interesting, I guess, but it's very theoretical. I mean, we need to see it applied in a practical scenario. And in that sense, the digital yuan is by far like the most advanced CBDC project in any major economy. And actually, even though China did not invent, of course, the idea of CBDCs, etc., China being so advanced with its digital yuan is somehow prompting or encouraging other countries to move much faster. I mean, I'm not saying that, let's say, Europe or even Japan and Korea would never have tested their own CBDCs. I mean, they would have eventually. But seeing China so advanced is undoubtedly prompting others to move faster. Well, before moving forward, I think it's important to remark that you're going to see digital yuan referred to as in the media as DCP many times. DCP stands for Digital Currency Electronic Payment. So digital yuan, DCP, eRMB, eCNY, all those four ideas are actually making reference to the same concept. I mean, they are all the same. It's also important to remark what I said before. CBDCs are not something that may be implemented overnight. China started to do research on its digital yuan years ago, in 2014, and they didn't start to actually test it until last April and May, 1 year ago, 2020. So we're talking about a research that lasted for 6 years. And even though the tests in China are going very well, we are not going to be the digital yuan properly rolled out until next year. So we're talking about a 6-year research plus a 2-year test. So as you can see, I mean, doing research on a CBDC, eventually deploying it, is something that takes a while. I mean, as I said before, it doesn't happen overnight. The same idea, for example, applies to Europe. The European Central Bank is discussing whether to proceed or not with digital euro. But even if they do, they themselves admitted that it might take them from 2 to 5 years to actually, make that become a reality. And I mean, realistically speaking, I think it would be more like 5 years than 2, because it takes years, to actually deploy a CBDC. It's not easy. There are many, not just technically speaking. I mean, it's not just about the technical architecture. It's also about so many different areas that you need to consider, because it is CBDCs are at the very core of monetary policy of so many sensitive subjects that central banks need to be careful about how to deploy it. They need to make sure that it's not going to backfire them. Well, as I said before, DCP has been introduced by the People's Bank of China, which is China's central bank. And as I mentioned before as well, it's going to be structured on this 2-tier monetary system I mean, the digital yuan is going to be issued by the People's Bank of China to the commercial banks, and the commercial banks are going to issue this digital yuan to the general public. When it comes to those distribution channels, most, well, I mean, there are like two different approaches to this topic. I mean, a CBDC might be like a one-tiered in the sense that we might find the central bank of a certain country like issuing the CBDC directly to the general public. So in that sense, the central bank would be acting like a commercial bank. And then there is this two-tiered model or system where there are intermediaries, which may be the commercial banks, fintech firms. The most common model it's going to be this two-tiered one. I mean, it's the one that we are seeing with the digital yuan in China, the one that the Bank of Japan is testing, because it's much more efficient. I mean, otherwise, if we like focus on the one-tiered system, we are going to see commercial banks being central banks being swamped with so many different tasks that they shouldn't be doing. So I think this second-tier model is going to be much more widely used. China's digital yuan or DCP is going to have like many advantages. I mean, I just selected a few of them on this slide. But to me, as I said before, I mean, even though CBDCs may be useful when controlling or helping like control monetary policy, promoting financial inclusion, etc., etc., to me, China's main focus has been put on the idea of facilitating or promoting the international adoption of the digital yuan of the yuan. So in other words, I mean, the idea is to promote cross-border payments in yuan, cross-border transactions. And I think this is the main idea, the main rationale behind China, not simply because I say so, but mostly because if we look at how the events have been developing lately, we clearly can see that this might actually be true, because we saw, for example, China, the People's Bank of China, signing a joint venture with SWIFT in early February, whose goal was precisely to help internationalize the yuan. We also saw China signing this RCEP free trade agreement with many other countries in Asia and Pacific, which is going to create a massive free trade area, which is like the perfect platform for China to try to use or promote its digital yuan. We also saw China starting to test its digital yuan in Hong Kong and soon in Macau thereafter. So those tests in Hong Kong, for example, are precisely involving cross-border transactions, because, I mean, the US dollar has undoubtedly been the most widely used currency in international trade for decades. This is not going to change overnight, but it might at least partially change if China manages to deploy its digital yuan properly for cross-border payments. I mean, one of the main challenges remains there. I mean, the yuan is still a non-convertible currency. So this is a big challenge. I mean, this is a big problem. But still, having the digital yuan may help China convert some of the US dollar-denominated transactions in international trade into RMB-denominated ones. This is, to me, the main goal, the main focus behind China's central bank, the People's Bank of China. And I think this idea has caught up the attention in the US as well, because even though initially the US was reluctant to study the idea of a digital US dollar, we saw recently Janet Yellen making some remarks that show us that their mind seems to be changing, because I guess they see the digital yuan as a threat to some extent, So that's to me China's main focus and goal right now, to try to promote cross-border payments. Another idea that I already mentioned before is that CBDCs may be helpful when promoting, when trying to tackle some issues in each financial system. In the case of China, for example, shadow banking was a big issue for years. I mean, this issue has been there for decades, but it's been maybe a bit less bad these last 3-4 years, but still, it's still there. I'm not going to dwell on shadow banking for much longer, though. I just want you to get the idea that China's digital yuan may become an effective tool as well to try to tackle this issue. For any of you, though, interested in shadow banking, well, feel free to ask me later in the questions or after the event. How's the digital yuan working so far? And after the digital yuan, maybe I'm going to answer some of your questions because I see many. So before moving forward to the other projects, well, the idea is that, as I said before, it was tested before in 4 cities. No, I mean, the test started last April and May in Shenzhen, Suzhou, Chengdu, and Xiong'an, and were extended to other areas after August. In Hong Kong, for example, the tests started recently. In Macau, they're going to start soon. So we are seeing this constant evolution. I think, well, there are like 2 key ideas that you need to take from these next slides. The first one is that all the tests, except the ones in Hong Kong and Macau, involve domestic transactions, while the ones in Hong Kong involve cross-border payments. This is why the ones in Hong Kong are actually going to be that important to me. Then, the second idea that I want you to get is that China has been gradually increasing the amount of people and money involved in those tests. Initially, those tests involved much less money and people, but now we are seeing all those massive digital yuan lotteries and giveaways. For example, in January, before the Lunar New Year, we saw well, millions of RMB being given away in Shenzhen to be used for a few selected people who won the lottery in Luohu district, for example, to do some shopping. So we are seeing this being increased because China wants to make sure that it works well, and so far it's been working very well. This is why, well, we can affirm, I think, that the plan that China had initially to roll out its digital yuan with the Olympic Games in Beijing next year is actually going to be able to be met in the end. No, that they did that plan because the tests, as I said before, seem to be going very well. Those slides mention some ideas that I mentioned already before, so I don't want to dwell on those for much longer. This one, for example, shows you what I said before. No, I mean, an idea of the digital yuan giveaway so far. So you can see the amount of people and money involved has been gradually increasing. The last one, for example, in Chengdu, they even involved 250,000 people and more than 50 million RMB, which is like a big increase from the initial massive giveaways from October. The tests in Hong Kong and Macau, as I said before, are going to be focused on cross-border payments. And I think, well, before finishing the digital yuan, there are 2 more ideas that I wanted to mention. The first one is this one: no differences with existing payment apps. Differences between DCP, DM, which is, I mean, Libra is not Libra anymore, it's DM now, Bitcoin and cash. Well, I think there are like 2 main ideas you need to get. DCP is going to support offline payments, and transaction speed is theoretically going to be very fast, much higher than that of DM and Bitcoin, theoretically. And the other idea that I wanted to mention before finishing digital yuan is this idea that, well, as you know, people in China, they already use very often WeChat Pay, Alipay, and also people were worried and they were like wondering how the digital yuan would be like coexisting with those existing payment platform apps. I mean, will the digital yuan like compete with those platforms, or will it like cooperate? So it looks like the idea is precisely to cooperate. I mean, China doesn't like intend to finish with those existing apps, but to integrate the digital yuan within those. So it's more an idea of cooperation rather than distraction, let's say. So before moving forward to the tests in Korea and Japan and then Project Ava, let me check some of the questions because I see there are many. So let me take like maybe 1 or 2.
We have very interesting conversations in the chat box, Dr. Oriol, if you can notice it.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so feel free to pick any questions that you think that you're ready to answer right now. Otherwise, we can allocate, perhaps, the last 5-10 minutes towards the end of your presentation.
Sure. Let me maybe just like pick a couple now and the rest at the end. So TPM asked me about the $1 of the Bahamas, and also whether central banks will take away the businesses of banking from the local banks. Well, I'm going to focus on the second part of your question because the one about the Bahamas is actually much longer to explain. About the Bahamas, just to mention that it's a CBDC that they deployed last October. It's called the Sun Dollar, and basically it's the first country which deployed a CBDC. But as I said before, it's not like the Bahamas are like what we call a major economy. So this is why, despite of course being important to see the Bahamas deploying their CBDC, we need to wait for a while and see, well, how digital yuan works, and maybe we need to wait until seeing those major economies doing the same before like jumping to any conclusion. When it comes to taking away the businesses of banking from the local banks, no, that's actually a question that many people ask me. I don't see the traditional banks, commercial banks, like disappearing because of CBDCs or anything like that. I mean, as we saw before, as I said before, there are like those two different distribution channels. If all countries were to adopt like a one-tiered system where central banks interacted directly with the general public, then in that case, it's true that commercial banks might be losing part of their purpose. But this is not going to be the case in most cases. I mean, first of all, we don't know how many countries will actually deploy CBDCs. Then we don't know how many countries will actually deploy CBDCs aiming to end the use of physical banknotes. In most cases, it's going to be like a complement. I mean, in most cases, central banks are not going to be willing to end with the use of physical cash and notes. I mean, it's just going to be like a complement. So aside from that, we also saw that most countries are going to focus on this two-tiered system where central banks are going to use commercial banks and fintech firms to distribute the CBDCs on a second level. So the commercial banks are not going to disappear or anything like that because of CBDCs. They are just going to be integrated. I mean, if anything, maybe we're going to see commercial banks in the future like teaming up or partnering more with fintech firms. But this is not just because of CBDCs. It is just of a tendency that already existed before. I mean, we've been seeing the commercial banks teaming up with the fintech scene for long. I mean, a few years ago, maybe commercial banks tended to be more reluctant towards the idea of fintech and the fintech ecosystem. But right now, they realize that they need to cooperate. So I think we are just going to see that an evolution of that, but we are not going to see commercial banks like suffering or disappearing or anything like that because of that. And then Grace, for example, asked me whether CBDCs are able to replace cash and online payment apps in the far future. Well, I mean, it's pretty much what I said now. I mean, it depends. Yes, I mean, of course, CBDCs have the potential to replace cash and other online payment apps in the future. The thing is, though, will central banks and governments want that? It's going to depend. I mean, for example, in Canada or even the European Union, they are not doing research on their own CBDCs with the aim of replacing physical cash completely. It's going to be like one more option for people. I mean, it's going to be like a system where all those different options are going to coexist. Whether in the future CBDCs end up replacing completely physical cash or not, and other online payment apps, where I mean, it's hard to say now. For now, we just know that they are going to cooperate because it's not the intention of most central banks to replace physical cash completely, at least not yet. Okay, so I'm going to move forward and leave the rest of the questions for later on, because I see there are many, but I cannot address them all now. So the tests in Korea and Japan. Well, as I said before, China is undoubtedly like the most advanced country in the world when it comes to major economies, etc. But we saw that there are many more other projects in Asia. Two of those very relevant projects are the projects from Korea and Japan. When it comes to Korea, the Bank of Korea announced in October, half a year ago, pretty much, that a test will be conducted this year, this 2021. And the goal of this pilot scheme will be to test whether their CBDC can be successfully launched or not in the future. This is when it comes to South Korea. When it comes to Japan, the Bank of Japan published last October a press release stating that the tests will start now this year, 2021, and the tests actually just started very recently. I'm going to focus on, since there is no time for both, I'm going to focus more on the Japan's digital yen. Basically, the whole idea that you need to get, like 2 or 3 ideas, but the first one is that it's going to be a retail CBDC. And then the idea is that unlike China's central bank, the Bank of Japan has no plan to issue a CBDC. So the idea is just to be prepared thoroughly to respond to changes in circumstances in an appropriate manner. So the Bank of Japan wants to test the digital yen in case sometime in the future they start to see a decline in the use of cash. It's going to be in that time when Japan may consider eventually rolling out its digital yen if the tests work well. So that's it. I mean, it's a different idea from that in China. China is actually testing the digital yuan, aiming to properly, like rolling out the digital yuan sometime soon. I mean, by the Winter Olympic Games next year. While in the case of Japan, it's different. It's a test that they want to do to see whether it is like feasible or not. But they don't aim to like properly deploying it anytime soon. One of the main reasons behind that is probably the fact that unlike China, people in Japan, they are still much more relying on physical coins and notes. I mean, people in Japan use coins and notes, the physical ones, much more often and commonly than in China. So maybe this is why the Bank of Japan doesn't want to change that yet. No, I mean, it's just a payment instrument alongside cash that they want to consider, but they don't want to roll it out yet. So these slides, which I can share with you later, show you some of the ideas of those tests, which I'm not going to dwell on for much longer because I want to cover all the different areas. I think this part is very important because it makes reference to that one-tiered versus two-tiered system that I mentioned before. Basically, even if the Bank of Japan, which is Japan's central bank, finally issues a general purpose CBDC, it would be still, according to them, appropriate to maintain this two-tier system of a central bank and commercial banks and private sector. Because the idea is not for the Bank of Japan to directly issue the digital yen to the general public, but to do it through intermediaries, commercial banks, fintech firms, etc. And this is going to be actually the main idea in most countries. I mean, as I said before, a one-tiered distribution system where the central bank directly interacts with the final user is not actually, to me, that feasible. So you can see some more information about this project, but the two main ideas that I wanted to get are those that I said before. No? I mean, that it's a retail CBDC, that the idea is not to deploy it anytime soon, etc. So as long as you get those ideas, I'm happy with that because there is like not much more time to analyze this deeply. You can see in here as well a proposal which was made last year, but I'm going to skip this one because it was just like a comment, but nothing like properly stable. So moving forward, Project ABBA in the Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. This was another very interesting project which took place recently. Project ABBA was started in January 2019, and the final report was published this last November 30. So it lasted for almost 2 years. The idea of Project ABBA was to test if a wholesale, in this case we're talking about a wholesale CBDC, between the central banks of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia was feasible to facilitate interbank clearing transactions, and secondly, whether it would be feasible and compatible to do it by using blockchain. Those were like the two ideas that the both central banks intended to test. Aside from those two central banks, to make those tests much more efficient, much more like comprehensive, they added a few more actors to the ecosystem. So basically, both central banks were joined by 3 commercial banks from each one of the 2 countries: Riyadh, Al Rajhi, and Al Idma from Saudi Arabia, and Dubai Islamic, First Abu Dhabi, and ENBD from the United Arab Emirates. So in total, the whole ABBA ecosystem encompassed those 2 central banks plus 6 commercial banks, 3 from each country. Aber means in Arabic crossing boundaries, and that was the idea precisely of this wholesale CBDC test, to cross boundaries and see whether it was feasible to create this wholesale CBDC or not. As I said, it's a wholesale CBDC because the idea was precisely to use it by central banks and the commercial banks participating in that project as a settlement unit for domestic, as well as for cross-border commercial bank transactions between both countries. The results were actually more satisfactory than expected. Both central banks in their final report admitted that it was feasible to issue this wholesale CBDC sometime in the future, and it was actually feasible to do so by using blockchain. So the requirements were not only met, but well, the expectations were actually exceeded compared to the very beginning. It doesn't mean, though, that Project ABBA is going to be materialized in the end. I mean, I'm not saying that there is going to be a wholesale CBDC between both countries. This was just a project. Whether this is going to become a reality or not, we don't know it yet. But at least it's good to see so many central banks like tapping into this area and studying these options and analyzing those, and who knows, maybe sometime in the future, like finally rolling out this wholesale CBDC as well. And well, just before ending my talk, the last idea that I want to talk about, that I want to discuss, is how will CBDCs impact our daily lives in this context of a much wider adoption of digital assets. Because, well, as you know, CBDCs are, as I said before, central bank digital currencies, but we don't need to look at CBDCs as a single category like floating in there. I mean, CBDCs are part of something much bigger. I mean, we are seeing this DeFi movement that I mentioned before, being so active like everywhere. We are seeing digital assets becoming much more common worldwide. I mean, a few years ago, of course, that people invested in cryptos, they use cryptos, but I mean, undoubtedly, this last 2-3 years, and especially this last year, we've seen this this idea of cryptos becoming mainstream. I mean, it's not just a few retail institutional investors investing in them, or retail investors. I mean, it's like we're seeing many retail investors investing in cryptos. We are seeing many institutional investors tapping into this market as well. So, I mean, well, the digital asset market is definitely booming. CBDCs are a game changer to me because they're going to promote payment efficiency and are going to be an additional alternative to the current model money from both an operational and technological perspective. However, there is this big elephant in the room, this big question that many people ask me all the time, and well, it's actually a tricky one, which is, how will CBDCs and cryptos coexist? Are they responding to the same reality? Well, the thing is, CBDCs and cryptos may, of course, coexist. I mean, not because a country deploys a CBDC, it means that cryptos need to disappear from that country or anything like that. Not at all. In some cases, we see, for example, some countries like China before adopting a tougher stance towards cryptos, even though this might be changing now. But well, for a few years, China has been very tough on cryptos, while they promoted blockchain technology and CBDCs. It's possible. I mean, it's possible for a country to promote their own CBDC and be tough against cryptos, and it's perfectly possible for a country to promote its own CBDC and be much more crypto-friendly. And it's even possible for a country not to be interested in doing any kind of work on CBDCs, but being crypto-friendly. I mean, all the options are possible. So this is why when people ask me how are they going to coexist? Well, I mean, it's perfectly possible to coexist because they are actually responding to different realities. CBDCs, as I said before, are central bank money, which means that they are issued by a central bank. They are the digital version of the physical money that we already have. They are not volatile, but they are not going to bring many returns either. They are this idea that I said before. I mean, they are a new idea because they are digital, but at the same time, they are responding to an existing reality, which is central bank money. Cryptocurrencies, on the other hand, well, as I said before, are something much more complex, much more people might say volatile, yes, but at the same time, it offers many more options because, I mean, they are not like central bank money issued by a central bank and controlled by a central bank. They are something different, which allows, well, this much higher amount of flexibility. So it's perfectly possible for both to coexist. I mean, it's perfectly possible for someone to make some payments in cash, then make some payments using a CBDC, and then at the same time, well, use cryptos to make payments, invest in cryptos. I mean, CBDCs are just going to be like one more addition to this, well, to this, let's say, digital assets, how you want to put reality, no? It's just like one more addition, but I don't see any kind of incompatibility. I know that I said before that one of the rationales behind CBDCs may be for some countries to try to counterbalance privately issued cryptocurrencies. I know that some countries might be thinking of that idea. No, I mean, thinking that if they promote their own CBDC, they are somehow going to, well, to prevent people from tapping into the crypto market that much. But I think it's actually like the wrong way to look at that, because I'm not, I mean, not for using a digital euro or digital US dollar, you are not going to invest in cryptos or use cryptos to making payments, because those are like different realities. They serve different purposes. So that's pretty much my take on this topic, but feel free to debate about that. My presentation actually ends now. Those conclusions are actually part of what I said before, so I'm not going to dwell on this for now. Basically, well, thank you for attending my talk, and I'm going to now check and try to answer as many questions as possible within this 10-minute time span that we have. And about my last point, this digital assets point, as I said before, feel free to debate that. I mean, I told you my take on this, but you may have like a different opinion, so feel free to express that as well on the chat or talk. Okay, so let me go from the beginning.
Dr. Oriol, thank you so much. That is an excellent presentation. So obviously we're going to have your question and answer open right now. So guys, you've I see that you're so active in a chat box. I love it. I think, Dr. Oriol, this is a very good sign that people are learning and very curious about CBDC. Okay, so if anyone here would like to ask Dr. Oriol audibly on what your questions are, otherwise we're just going to read it off the box. But I think that it's a lot more interactive, a lot more exciting if anyone can put their hand up and ask the questions that you wrote in the box. Anyone? I'm going to count from 1 to 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Dr. Oriol, I'll let you pick one of the questions from the chat box.
Sure. Okay, let me pick one. Okay, let me check. I resolved already that one from Grace TPM. Sanjeev replied that one from Grace as well. China has made it clear that cash will be available alongside CBDC. Yes, exactly, that's true. It's not actually a question or what I remarked, but I think it's important to address that one as well. It's true that China has been testing ATM machines, which allow CBDC to be converted into cash and vice versa. That is very true. Those tests were actually performed in Shenzhen in February and March in some selected branches from the Agricultural Bank of China, because the idea is pretty much that one. It's what I said before. I mean, the idea is not for China, for most countries to replace like physical cash like overnight. In the case of China, though, physical cash is not that widely used. So this is why we may see in the future like well, physical banks and notes completely like vanishing, completely disappearing. But this is so because this tendency already existed before the digital yuan. In other countries, we are simply going to see, like, for example, let's say the Eurozone, European Union, maybe we're going to see like digital euro as one more means of payment alongside physical cash. But the idea is not to make physical cash disappear. I mean, it might disappear in many countries in the future, but it's going to be part of this tendency that wasn't actually started with CBDCs. This tendency like maybe started like many years ago with companies like, PayPal, Alipay in China, WeChat Pay, I mean, those companies like maybe started this tendency towards a much more digital world, then also cryptocurrency. So CBDCs are going to be like maybe one more factor helping to see this decline in the use of cash, but they're not going to be like the main factor making physical cash disappearing.
We have
yes.
somebody raising his hand and wanting to ask you a question live.
Sure.
So we
Sure, perfect.
Spotlight on TPM.
Yeah, hi, Doctor. Thanks, Lynn. Just to follow the point about cashless society, I read somewhere, I think it's either Sweden or Norway, one of the Scandinavian countries, where basically I think hardly many people actually use cash. Basically, everybody's on cashless. I think it's the government's policy to make sure that we don't have to do it with cash. I mean, especially with COVID and all this health consideration. Do you think that some countries, maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, will actually have a cashless based system?
Well, I think you may be referring to Sweden, I guess so, because you know that they are testing their e-krona, which is their CBDC. It's one of the most advanced CBDC projects in Europe. I think we are all moving towards a cashless society. I mean, undoubtedly. How long it's going to take, I mean, it's hard to say. It's very hard to say because, you know, each country is different. So, I mean, it's not going to be the same in China where people are not like using physical cash that much. It's not going to be the same, for example, than in India or the US or the European Union. It's going to be different in each country. But I think, of course, the future is like a cashless society. I think the pandemic has, of course, like sped up this tendency. Undoubtedly, I mean, people are maybe a bit reluctant now to touch so many coins and notes compared to before because of the fear of getting infected, that's for sure, because of hygienic reasons. But I don't think that it's simply because of the pandemic. No, I mean, this is a tendency that has been like there for years. It's been going on for like a few years, and it's going to remain there. I mean, yes, we are moving towards a cashless society. How long it's going to take, I mean, it's hard to know. I don't think actually governments need to like encourage people moving towards a cashless society. I don't think they need to make any law to promote that because it's like a natural tendency. I mean, the more digital versions of money that we have, the more people will start using those, especially younger people. I mean, right, a few years ago, it was just all about using like a physical cash, but now we can choose between using those payment platform apps like the ones in China, which are Alipay or PayPal. No, we can also hopefully someday in the future choose to use a CBDC. We can also choose to buy cryptocurrencies, not just as an investment, but also to make payments because, you know, PayPal in the US and other companies allows you to do so. So, I mean, we are moving towards a cashless society, undoubtedly. How long it's going to take, it's going to depend on each country. But yes, that's a future.
Just another point. I mean, the payment gateway business is so huge among banks, right? And of course, everybody's making some cut either way. And CBDC basically will probably take a lot of business from the commercial banks. And do you think the commercial banks will basically have a pushback on that?
Well, I mean, it's pretty much what I said before, no? It may take some business from the commercial banks, but I think that commercial banks are already adapting to these new realities. I mean, we are seeing, for example,
in the sense that if you look at the e-wallet kind of what you call penetration, like I'm from Malaysia, and we have about 50 companies which basically are involved in the payment gateway and offering e-wallets. And of course, that will basically trash out and there'll be only a few players. But it's a very rich sort of what you call business sector, you know, the payment gateways. And I think CBDC will have a lot of, I mean, China, of course, they do it very quickly, but other countries, there'll be a lot of resistance, I think, because the legacy businesses would have a lot to lose, I think.
Well, yes, I mean, for starters, we don't actually know, what I said before, no, how many countries will actually like move forward with their CBDC projects. I mean, we are seeing now many countries like willing to test and their CBDCs, etc. But we don't actually know what it's going to look like in the end. I mean, we may be seeing like all countries adopting CBDCs, or we may be seeing just, let's say, China and then a few more ones adopting CBDCs. So we don't know for sure know, I mean, how many countries will actually follow this trend, like for real in the end. Aside from that, well, it's true that this may affect other companies, but I think they're going to find their way. I mean, we are seeing, for example, commercial banks lately being much smarter than a few years ago when it comes to cooperating with the fintech world. I mean, until maybe 5-6 years ago, we saw like commercial banks a bit terrified about the idea of fintech firms, and they thought that it was more like a competition, no? But right now, I don't think that most commercial banks see fintech that much of a threat than they see them like as an opportunity to team up and partner. We are seeing like so many partnerships. Even in Hong Kong, for example, we saw all those virtual banks being created, those 8 virtual banks. But if you look at them, most of them are already like backed by a big traditional bank. So I think in the end, the whole idea is that commercial banks are actually, well, navigating this whole situation much more efficiently than a few years ago. And they know that, they may not be left behind. No? I mean, they need to create their own virtual banks, or they need to back their new project. They need to team up with fintech firms. So it's true that initially CBDCs may seem scary in that sense for like incumbents, for legacy companies, as you said. But I think that in the end, they are going to find their way, the same as they did before. I don't think it's such of a threat, honestly.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Oriol, do you have 5 more minutes to entertain perhaps 2 more questions from our audience? I see 2 hands being raised. But before that, let me give you a 30-second break. I need to plug our community because we're going to continue this interesting conversation over there. So let me share my screen very quickly. You guys, I'm going to let Dr. Oriol drink water first because he's been very busy speaking. Okay, excellent. Give me a second, everyone. Okay, perfect. So let me do this. Okay. All right. Perfect. So if any one of you are not part of the community in FUSANG yet and really want to reach out to Dr. Oriol or any one of us and wanted to learn more about either CBDC and other topics with regards to digital assets, please download our app by going on App Store or Google Play. So you guys can very quickly scan the QR code. If not, you can just type in FUSANG on this App Store, FUSANG. Alternatively, you can also key in community.fusang.co to log in from your desktop. So that is it, really. We're going to continue the conversation there. Dr. Oriol, we're going to post all the other questions in the chat box over there. And, you know, it will be great if you can answer it directly in our community. In the meantime, I would like to call, I think this is Antoine, MA, to ask your question, and then we're going to go to Jayesh later before we wrap things up.
All right, thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question regarding the differences between different kinds of digital assets, for example, stable coins and CBDCs. We have seen that major stable coins are pegged on fiat currencies, so they are also in some ways related to the traditional financial institutions, for example, the USDC, and what would be in the light of this comparison, the differences with CBDCs, for example, the yuan. And second question I would have for you would be related to the value of CBDCs, for example, the yuan. Would it be a value identical to the physical yuan or a different one? And in case it's a different one, could you explain how this would be fixed? Thank you.
Sure. I'm going to start with the second one, which is shorter. The value theoretically should be the same. I mean, there has been like no indication showing that digital yuan is going to have like a different value from the physical one. And the same idea applies so far to all the other CBDCs, which are like being either test it or doing research on. Because the idea is, I mean, it's what I said before. I mean, the idea is to like add one more kind of central bank money to the whole system, to the whole structure. So unless there is like any last minute change, the idea is precisely to have the same value. When it comes to the first question that you asked me, well, it is true that stable coins would be like the most similar idea to CBDCs. That is true, but I mean, they're not exactly the same either. I mean, of course, a stable coin is more similar to a CBDC than let's say, for example, a Bitcoin, undoubtedly, but they're not the same either. I mean, there are like many differences, and I would like to go through that like much more in detail. But for example, stable coins are a liability on the issuer, whereas, for example, CBDCs are a liability on the balance of the central bank because they are central bank money. So as you can see, the whole structure, the whole starting point is different, even though it's true that stable coins are going to be pegged normally to one or more fiat currencies. That is true. But a CBDC, to put it like in another way, are actually going to be a fiat currency per se, no? Because, I mean, a CBDC, despite being digital and programmable, the digital yuan is going to be the yuan, nonetheless. So you can see it's similar, but it's a bit different. So I hope I solved it. As I said, I would like to go through that much more in detail, but at least I hope I gave you the two main ideas.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine. And last but not the least, Jayesh, can we please spotlight him and allow him to ask questions, please?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yeah, so thanks for this platform. It's great to listen to the experts and of course network with like-minded people. It's a great platform. So thanks for this and today's session. My question is, the flip side of the cryptocurrencies that we are talking about is the vast resources that they use, like the electricity and the hardware. Will the same be with CBDC, or it will be that will not come? That issue will not come with CBDC.
Well, I mean, yeah, I know it's been lately like a big concern. All this whole idea of the environmental footprint of cryptocurrencies and NFTs. When it comes to CBDCs, it shouldn't be that bad. I mean, of course, it's going to have an impact. Theoretically, it shouldn't be that bad. Because I mean the mining process and everything is different. I mean, it's not it's not going to be entirely on the blockchain, as I said before. So it's a different idea, technically speaking, from mining like coins, cryptocurrencies, from mining from creating NFTs, for example, non-fungible tokens. So the environmental footprint of CBDC should be much lower. I mean, there is going to be some footprint, of course, because it may partially use blockchain, but it's not comparable to that. No, I would say that this shouldn't be that much of a concern compared, for example, to cryptos or NFTs. Even though, I mean, even when it comes to cryptocurrencies and NFTs, there are many initiatives now about decarbonizing blockchain and, well, analyzing how this footprint can be reduced. So I think in the future we're going to see an improvement in that area as well.
Okay, thank you. And first, last small micro question is that the central banks always use the monetary policy to control inflation and everything through, and which controls the the cash. How to control these private cryptocurrencies because they are decentralized. So how they will control in the future the central banks, overall economy and inflation.
No, I mean that's the thing. I mean, the central banks are going to control their CBDCs because they are issued by them and they are central bank money. When it comes to cryptocurrencies, I mean, they are part of this decentralized finance. It's the whole idea is precisely not to be controlled by central banks. All what governments can do when it comes to cryptocurrencies is, well, creating new rules to make sure that everyone plays on a level playing field. No, I mean, you know, several countries have introduced like requirements to make sure that all crypto trading platforms, well, are actually compliant, and then etc. You know, to make sure that the system actually works well, and to make sure that everyone, all the actors, like the trading platforms, people buying, selling cryptocurrencies, are reliable and actual like players. But aside from regulating that, I mean, it's a different scenario. I mean, the whole idea about cryptocurrencies is precisely to be used like in a decentralized manner. You know, so I mean, countries, governments are not going to use cryptocurrencies to control inflation or anything like that. No, that's something that will be done via CBDCs.
Okay. Thanks for the answers. Really very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for your participation. Shayas, just so you know, Ashley did a talk yesterday on the environmental impact of NFTs, where we also covered cryptocurrencies. I think we're going to post that. I did that through another community, but we're definitely going to put the recording in our community. If you're interested to watch that, please do so. That should be out probably in a week or so. But anyway, thank you everyone for sticking around. You have a wonderful Tuesday and the rest of the week. Dr. Oriol, you did an amazing job. I can see a lot of people are interested to see if they can get a hold of your slides, but I think we can talk about that later. But guys, this webinar is recorded, and definitely everyone's going to have I think a message from our community manager as how you can access the video recording. But anyway, thank you everyone, and I hope to see you again in one of our next events. Okie dokie. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.